Hey, you guys, it's me. I'm back. All right, you guys. So I think I was gonna do an Oregon ash tree next, and then the more I started thinking about it as I looked at my trees, I kind of wanted to do all the evergreens and the conifer trees kind of together because I learned so much about the differences, and I've always kind of lumped them all together. And so I don't know if you recognize that, but that is, what is that? What is that? It is a ponderosa pine tree. Yes, the genus Pinus. And lucky for me, the species is ponderosa. Much easier to say. So it is an evergreen and it is coniferous. Now, this was first documented in eastern Washington state, the first one, in kind of where Spokane is at. So, interesting, it is also one of the most widely distributed pine species in North America, which I thought was quite interesting. Now, it is associated, however, mostly in the mountains, but they do occur in the Willamette Valley here in Oregon, in the Cascade Range, the Rocky Mountains, and in Arizona and New Mexico, of all places. So, although they are in North America, they are mostly associated in those areas. Now, a power pack. I thought this was interesting. This kind of took place down in the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest, which I didn't look it up, but I believe just from hearing the name, I believe that's kind of southern Oregon. But there was a tree down there, a Pacific ponderosa pine, that was measured with a laser to be 268 feet, 4 inches high. So the measurement was performed by both a couple arborists, professional arborists, and then the tree was climbed on October 13th of 2011 by Ascending the Giants, which is a tree company here in Portland. And they directly measured it with a tape line, and it came out to 268.3. So, I mean, if you're like me and you're not great with math, to me, that's pretty darn close, right? Or you could be like, hey, close only counts in horseshoes. So that's still completely inaccurate and wrong. So it's a good thing they tape measured it. But I'd say that's pretty good. Anyways, as of 2015, a sugar pine tree was measured at 273.9. So that surpassed the ponderosa, previously considered the world's tallest pine tree, which I didn't know for a long time. The world's tallest pine tree was down in southern Oregon. Now, the bark of the ponderosa pine helps distinguish it from other pine species. Mature to over-mature individual trees, they have kind of a yellow to orange bark in broad to very broad plates with black crevices, as you see there on the left. Now, a power pack, a young ponderosa, like on the right, they're referred to as blackjacks because the younger bark is darker brown and almost black. So there you go. Now, you might notice kind of a theme when I do my trees. I always try to cover something in Colorado or the Rocky Mountain area, and then something here in the Willamette, kind of the Pacific Northwest area, because my badge counselor, Debbie, is in Colorado. So I figure if there's information on that, I'll include it. So the Columbia ponderosa pine has different needles than the Rocky Mountain species, which I thought was interesting. So the Columbia pine, as you see there, kind of on the left-hand side, relatively flexible needles in fascicles of 3, okay? And the Rocky Mountains they're shorter needles, a little bit more stout, and they grow in bushy tuft-like fascicles of just 2 or 3. So fascicles, if you don't know what that is a, like in bunches and groups, kind of like if you think of like a hydrangea plant or a rhodie plant, those flowers are in fascicles. It's a big bunch. And so that's how the needles are on the ponderosa pine. The egg-shaped cones, which are often found in great numbers under the trees, they're about 3 to 5 inches long. They're purple when first chewed off by the squirrels, and then they become more brown. And as they dry, they're a little bit more spherical, and each scale has a sharp point. So that is kind of how you determine the cones of that tree. Interesting. Okay, so the power pack, I've got a couple big ones for the ponderosa. The fire cycle for the ponderosa pine is like 5 to 10 years, which I didn't even understand fire cycles that much. I still don't really understand it, but I didn't really even know much about it until I started doing this. But for the ponderosa pine, the fire cycle is 5 to 10 years. So that is in which natural ignition sparks a low intensity fire, and low, once a decade fires are known to actually have helped the trees live for half a millennium or more, which is interesting. Now the tree has very thick bark, and its buds are produced.
But Mommy.
What? Hi.
Mommy.
Oh, are you tired? I'm doing a presentation. Do you want to sit next to me? Here. Okay. So it's protected by needles, and what happens is then that allows even some of the younger individual trees to survive weaker fires. And so many ecosystems, particularly forest, which is what we always think of, right? Like forest fires, or, the pine trees and stuff like that. They have evolved with fire as an essential contributor to habitat vitality and renewal. So many plant species in fire-affected environments require fire to germinate, establish, or to reproduce. And wildfire suppression it not only eliminates these species, guys, but also the animals that depend on them, which I never really thought of it that way, because with campaigns in the United States, obviously historically, they are molded, kind of the public opinion, to believe that wildfires are harmful to nature. And this view is based on outdated beliefs. I don't know about beliefs, but outdated information, right? Because more recent ecological research has shown, however, that fire is an integral component in the function and biodiversity of many natural habitats, and that the organisms within these communities, they have adapted to withstand, even to exploit the natural wildfire. So I guess what this is kind of about is it's not just the forests. I mean, I'm kind of focusing on forests right now because that's the badge, obviously. But the savanna, prairies, all of that, they require fire. There are plants and trees and species and that require fire to keep going. And so I guess another discussion that we could talk about with fires is Smokey Bear campaign, right? Like only you can prevent forest fires. So you kind of have that campaign of we need to suppress fires. We need to make sure that we aren't setting fires because it's bad. Or at least that's as a kid what I remember. And I think part of that, even now as an adult, I brought up a few examples there. The 2017 Eagle Creek fire here in Oregon and Washington. That was bad. That was started by a couple teenagers that threw a lit firework down into the gorge, and it devastated. It crossed the gorge. It was in Oregon, it was in Washington, and it was bad. And everybody hated that kid. I mean, he got death threats. Everybody had opinions as to what should have happened to him. And I'm not saying that shouldn't have, but I'm just saying wildfires do get a bad rap. And, we can all guess why. Because it takes out homes. And we've kind of moved into the forest. So we have that issue then. So in 2002, again, Colorado, because I'm bringing up Colorado, I remember there was the Hayman fire in Colorado. That was bad too. I don't know about Eagle Creek, if that actually killed people. I don't know if it took out homes. I think it did, but I don't know if it actually killed anybody. The Hayman fire in Colorado did, I believe, because I think the lady that started it, she had a campfire or something, and she was, I don't know if she thought she'd put it out, or I don't know exactly the situation, but she ended up serving time because people were killed on that. And it was a really bad fire. Took out a lot of Colorado. There was a TV show I had watched called 24 to Life, and it featured a firefighter named Ben. The show just featured like the last 24 hours before someone actually goes and serves time in prison. And at the end of the show, they talk about why they're going. And this one guy, his name was Ben, he had deliberately set forest fires so that he could get overtime. He was a firefighter. And fortunately, nobody died, but he ended up going to prison. And then more recently, the 2020 Beachy Creek fire, a town here in Oregon called Detroit, gone, absolutely gone. So I think that's why most people's instinct is to suppress fires, when in reality, like Debbie and I were talking about, I'll do a presentation on, is fire mitigation for your home. Obviously, we have now moved into the forests, so that's what happens. Is it the problem with those fires is it takes out people's houses and their livelihoods sometimes. So, what it will take, obviously, is a wise forester, a good forester kind of knows what's going on to be like, hey, time out. We don't need to suppress these fires. We need to let them burn if we can, and maybe do some mitigation around homes. But if we don't mitigate these, or if we suppress these fires, if we don't let them burn, it will take out the species at some point, and that will be the last tree it burns down. So that's, again, something I've learned here, that that's why foresters are important. They're important people because they know the trees and they know what it takes. So that's my soapbox. Okay. The uses for the ponderosa pine by the animals. The needles are the only known food for this, I think it's jelly-child moth. That's the picture of it. Also, various mountain beetles. Seeds are eaten by the squirrels, chipmunks, quail, grouse, mouse, mule deer, and black bears. Now, for humans, the Native Americans, they used the sap. They used a lot of stuff. They used the patch as salve, or the pitch as salve, and they used like the limbs and the branches for canoes, and then they used needles for baskets, and then they boiled solutions out of the needles and stuff to treat coughs and fever. Now, more currently for ponderosa pine, old growth is used for railroads because new growth is just too easily warped. So that's what's going on with that. So that's the ponderosa pine. I know that was a lot, but I thought that was very interesting about the fire cycle. So this, Oregonians, I don't know if that looks familiar. See, so when you're looking at these trees, do they all kind of look the same? They might, but they're not, obviously. This is another view of that same tree. You kind of have some different looks to it. That tree there in the middle, right there, that's actually in Wenatchee, Washington, which is pretty interesting looking, pretty old. That's a Douglas fir. Now, also known as the Douglas spruce, Oregon pine, or Columbian pine. Okay, the genus is a Pseudotsuga, and the species is a Menziesii. Oh, correct me if I'm wrong, Debbie, but I think that's what I'm going to call it. Despite its common names, though, it's not a true fir. The genus would be a beast for the true fir. The spruce, hold on. The spruce, the genus would be Picea or Picea. If it was a pine, of course, the genus would be species. So it's not any of those, even though it's called an Oregon pine, a Columbian pine, or a spruce. It's also not a true hemlock. The genus name Pseudotsuga means false hemlock, but it's an evergreen, it's a conifer, and it is the Pseudotsuga menziesii. And it's a conifer, so it's got some cones. Power pack. Okay, so David Douglas, he was a botanist, and he worked as a gardener, and he is best known for his namesake, this tree, the Pseudotsuga, the Douglas fir. Now, the thing about this guy is he has contributed greatly, obviously, for the species that he has introduced to Great Britain. So over 80 species of plants and animals have Douglasii in their scientific names, including the Pherosoma douglasii, which is a species of horned toad, and that's in his honor, as he introduced hundreds of plants to the Great Britain and Europe. He introduced Douglas fir into cultivation in 1827, as well as all of those others, and that transformed the British landscape and the timber industry, obviously, and altogether he introduced about 240 species of plants to Great Britain. So that's pretty amazing. A lot of pine trees there. A lot of pine trees. So, okay, I'm going to have to pause this. Hold on just a second. Okay, guys, hi guys, I'm back. I I had to pause. My Clay just came home, and so I had to go deal with him. And now I've got a different location because it's dark outside. So, anyways, we were just discussing about David Douglas, and that he totally changed, because 240 species plants to Britain. I mean, that's introducing a whole lot of different trees, pine trees mostly, as you can see, but a few other things. And of course, he's just pretty amazing in that respect. So here in Oregon, though, Doug firs are the state tree here, and that was designated by legislature in 1936 as it is the most common tree out here. And here in Portland, Oregon, David Douglas School District is also named after him. And in Vancouver, where I used to live up in Washington, close to Clarence up there, just across the river from Portland, he is remembered via David Douglas Park. And it was actually used in World War II as interim housing for Kaiser shipyard workers, which is also Kaiser Permanente. You've heard of the Kaiser shipyards at Kaiser Permanente. So that's what Kaiser Permanente is, a guy named Kaiser. So anyways, that is an actual picture of David Douglas Park. It's huge. It's not just that little tiny playground there. That's kind of what I had pictured, but there's some trails there. There's some baseball fields and soccer fields and things like that. So there's that. More power packs there, obviously. Okay, now the bark on the young trees is very thin, smooth, gray. And on mature trees, usually it's really thick and kind of corky. And it's, grown up to 14 inches thick with very distinctive deep vertical fissures caused by growth. So layers of dark brown bark are interspersed with layers of lighter colored corky material. And the thickness makes the Douglas fir probably the most fire-resistant tree native to the Pacific Northwest. The female cones have distinctive long trifid or three-pointed bracts, which protrude prominently above each scale. And they're said to resemble the back half of a mouse, with 2 feet and a tail. And the cones are tan, and when mature, they're about 2 to 4 inches long. And then for the coastal Douglas, they're about an inch shorter from those that are in towards, like the Rocky Mountain areas. So if you look at that picture, it's kind of hard to tell. And what I found interesting, hold on just a second, let me go grab my cone. I found one. I couldn't even believe it. I'm like, oh my gosh. Doug fir cone. So it's got the little, and this one kind of dried up a little bit because I had it out on the counter for a while, and I think it got batted around by a little cat and little boys and stuff like that. So I found a Doug fir cone, and I was really excited because I knew what that was. So there we go. There's that. Okay, the leaves are flat, soft, linear, and the needles are 1 to 1.5 inches long, generally resembling those of firs, occurring singly rather than in fascicles, and they completely encircle the branches, which can be useful in recognizing the species. So if you look at that, do you remember how how it completely encloses that looks like some came off, but like that goes all the way, there's like a little all the way around. So like a Christmas tree, like that's usually what we get, like noble fir, right? And so they're soft and they just make it easy to hang ornaments on and stuff like that. But whereas they had the fascicles, like the little fan-shaped like bunches on a pine tree, very different. So the uses by animals, the Doug fir, the seeds are extremely important food source for small mammals such as moles, shrews, chipmunks, and they consume about 65% of each annual seed crop. The Douglas squirrel harvests and hoards great quantities of Doug fir cones and also consumes mature pollen cones, the inner bark, terminal shoots, and developing young needles. Mature or old growth Doug firs, they're primary habitat of the red tree vole, the spotted owl. Home requirements for breeding pairs of spotted owls are at least 990 acres of old growth. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. But red tree voles may also be found in immature forests if the Doug fir is kind of the significant component. The red tree vole nests almost exclusively in the foliage of the trees, typically 5 to 165 feet above the ground, and its diet consists chiefly of Douglas fir needles, and then the dwarf mistletoe and certain mosses and lichens are parasitic plants found on Douglas firs. So that's the animals. Now for us, for humans, used extensively in forestry management as a plantation tree for softwood timber. Douglas fir is one of the world's best timber producing species and yields more timber than any other species in North America. And that's making the forest lands of Western Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, and the most productive on the continent. And then ornamental value in parks commonly used as Christmas trees since 1920. Okay, so now we're kind of out of the whole evergreens, and we're going to go into more deciduous trees, like the Oregon ash, for instance. But let's review those needles. Are they all pine needles? No, they're not. They're not pine needles. So if you look there on the left, right, those are pine needles. That's the ponderosa pine needles. They look very different, right? Those big fascicles, big bunches. They're kind of in the top middle right here. Do you remember those? On woody stems, woody pegs. Those are cedar needles. And then right here, pine needles, fir needles. Who knew? I always called them pine needles. I didn't know there was a difference. Yes, I learned something. That's pretty cool. So, okay, back to Oregon ash. All right. Genus is Fraxinus. Species is Latifolia. It is a deciduous, of course, and it can grow 65 to 80 feet. Now, they are found on the west side of the Cascade Range from southwestern British Columbia through western Washington, western Oregon, and northwestern California in the central California in the Sierra Nevadas. Okay, it grows in wet habitats, preferably, obviously, damp, loose soil. Now, Oregon ash is well adapted to soggy ground because of its root system. It's shallow, but it's very wide, so it holds up really well when it's windy. The tree needs both male and female to successfully pollinate the trees. And the tree fruit is a cluster of samaruas. They're 1 to 2 inches long with wings. So if you look at that, those are pretty long. I don't know if you remember like what maple propellers look like. There's like the little seed with the little propellers on the side. Same thing, but longer. The Oregon ash has light gray vertically ridged bark, which creates kind of diamond-shaped spaces in between the ridges. Now the young trees have much smoother bark, kind of like the ponderosa, right? But additionally, most of their branches and twigs are very straight. So that's the Oregon ash. So kind of distinctive there. The leaves, they're compound leaves, and they are 4 to 5 inches long with 5 to 9 leaflets. And they're on a linear stalk, and each leaflet is oval, and the leaves are lighter green than those of associated ashes and species. Leaves always turn bright yellow and they fall off early fall. They're really pretty. We have a lot of them around here, I notice, for ornamental. Okay, so the uses of the Oregon ash. They provide nourishment to songbirds, squirrels, and waterfowl, deer and elk. They graze on the foliage and the sprouts. Now for us, due to the limited availability, it's rarely used for hardwood. Now I put Cowlitz Indian tribe because Cowlitz County is up in Washington. That tribe used Oregon ash for canoe paddles, digging sticks, and more recently we use Oregon ash for similar purposes like tool handles and sports equipment because it's strong, its strength, stiffness, and its shock resistance and flexibility, and then the fact that it wears smooth over time. So that's with young ash. Now mature ash is good firewood because it becomes less flexible and more brittle as it matures. So the 21st century uses are more ornamental. Shade trees desired because it grows really fast and it's symmetrical. It's really hardy and it's really pretty. A lot of trees around here I've noticed in our neighborhood are Oregon ash. Again, I've learned all this stuff, so now I'm like, oh, that's an Oregon ash. So, and those trees, they're the first ones to drop their leaves. So I think that's really interesting. Okay, so the next tree, that's pretty distinctive looking. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's next. That is gonna be an oak tree. But that's as far as I got. I will continue more next time. I've just got a few more trees to do, about 3 more, because I literally had to do 15 species. So there you go, guys. I hope that was enlightening. And off I go to go feed a cat and just make sure I got my boys tucked in, and that's that for tonight. All right.